Welcome to another episode of A Question of Meaning
Hello,
with
friends.
Arthur and Katie.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, you stepped on my
You
line.
want to run that and take that from the top?
No, and that's all hackneyed. That's why you stepped on it, because it's gotten kind of hackneyed.
Yes. Good evening, friends. Here's our message for this week. Brighten the corner where you are. Brighten the corner where you are.
Now, can any viewer
Someone
guess?
far from harbor, you're stepping on my song. You may guide across the bar. Brighten the corner where you are.
So if anyone can guess where that came from,
Sorry, time's up. That's from a really kind of a bad screen adaptation of Erskine Caldwell's brilliant Tobacco Road. Dude, Lester, the troublesome, all the other children had fled. The other 13 or 16 Lester children had fled as soon as they got old enough. But Dude didn't have a whole lot in the upper story, stuck around. And Sister Bessie, the religious fanatic of the neighborhood, married him. And he was a complete maniac, absolutely psychologically twisted. But whenever he sang, he had this angelic, high-pitched voice, not like what you just heard me do, but just crystal clear.
It was a
and
shock.
Sister Bessie would blow on that. She married him. He was like, I think, 15 years older.
whatever, yeah.
Like,
He was 40.
she's in her 40s at least. She gets married. But she would blow through her pitch pipe, and they would start singing like "Bright in the Corner Where You Are."
And he would just
Angelic
shock
harmony,
you with
yeah.
his voice. But the reason that's on your mind is because we just saw that early John Ford movie, which had the band was playing that song. The religious
that's
band.
right. That's right.
It was called Up the River. It was made in 1930.
First screen appearance, Humphrey Bogart.
That was Humphrey Bogart's third screen appearance.
First for Spencer Tracy.
Right. Interesting movie.
Yeah.
Although
Ward Bond was in it. Made just a brief appearance. Ward Bond played Love Bentley, for any of you Erskine Caldwell fans, the guy who had the sack of turnips, which in Tobacco Road, the first 5 chapters describe in endless detail how the Lester family managed to get Love's turnips away from him.
I was just looking at you in astonishment, because there it was. It's like you could think we had just we'd planned this ahead of time, because there you go back to Tobacco Road.
What you see is what you
Quite
get.
amazing, really. Well, so I don't think this is what we were going to talk about.
No, we hadn't actually talked about what we're going to talk about. One of our favorite things, just dive in and sink or swim, as I say it. But I had a thought. We are pleased God let this be the final draft of our book, our new book, We Are All Innocent by Reason of Insanity, and we mean it. I was looking at chapter 6 today. Katie's up on the 3rd floor in her office. I call it the crow's nest. We send each other emails, and we have an intercom. It's just like a real office kind of thingy.
That's a joke.
And
Anyway.
kind of.
If hippies ran the world, it would be
Hippies
like
ran
an
the world
ordinary
wild in the
office.
streets. I think they made a movie about that once.
But anyway, so
Stoke the fears of the...
what were you reading?
I was reading chapter 6, and oh God, I can't even remember what I put this in the comment that I made was, and this is really all you need to know. When I was in the 1st grade, my mother worked at a resort called Wakulla Springs, south of Tallahassee. And I was the only child on the property, and that doesn't matter at all. What matters is that I went to a real backwoods, that's a real swampy, kind of real backwoods area of the Florida Panhandle. It's about 30 miles south of Tallahassee, I think.
Sort of in the armpit of Florida.
No, the armpit's farther south.
Yeah,
This
but
is
it's
kinda-
getting in that direction.
Yeah, it's getting there. Swamp, basically. And I went to a elementary school, my first experience with public school. And there were 2 kids in the class, 1st grade, and they were so poor. I mean, even at that age, I was living a complete fantasy life on Wakulla Springs, eating in the staff dining room, waited on by black waiters in white jackets, and traded drawings with the designer of the battleship Missouri, and Michael Rennie and Rhonda Fleming and movie stars used to come stay. It just gave me a totally, thank God, unrealistic outlook on life. Point is that these 2 kids were just like, they always had runny noses. It was just like really, really gross. Little boy and little girl, brother and sister, and they were just so poor. And one day I got the idea. I was up, there was a series of steps and a little porch that went into the second floor of the school. And I looked over the edge, and these two little brother and sister were sitting by themselves, as usual, on this bench below me. And I looked around and I found a couple of really small pebbles, and I thought I'd play a trick on them. Mainly because I already was picking up on the vibes that these kids were like untouchable because of their poverty and their runny noses. And so I went over and dropped a pebble off, and it hit the little boy right on the top of the head. And his hand went up to his head, and then he looked around, he started looking up, and I ducked back in and got away with it. But what I felt at that exact moment was a sense of real shame at what I'd done. I had a puritanical grandmother. My father made one child support payment and disappeared, so I was essentially raised by my mother and my grandmother. Is there a psychiatrist in the house? Anyway, I'd heard a lot about various things thou shalt not do, but it never said anything about dropping a pebble on some kid's head and playing a trick on someone like that.
Yeah, right.
But there was a real organic sense of shame.
Huh.
And I thought, what was the source of that at the age of 6? Where did that come from? Because a lot of what we're talking about is subjective mind and objective mind.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, that's interesting.
so the
'cause
question
it
was,
fits
what is the conscience?
What fits in with what we talked about last week, really, which is morality.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So
what's the
we
source
were
of Jiminy
discussing-
Cricket?
Right, we were discussing what's the source of morality. If there's no traditional moral standards, for centuries of thousands of years, they were these rules put down on us by God or by the king or some outside authority figure to regulate our behavior.
You can only eat human flesh on...
Right.
You can't eat human flesh on Tuesday afternoons.
That's right.
Stuff like that.
And nowadays, all those outside standards have been eliminated. We've rejected them. So where does morality come from? And I don't think we ever really got to that, well, where does it come from
sounds like
question.
us.
So that sounds like that's really what you're asking.
about
Is
that?
okay. So
No
Interesting.
one could be more surprised than me. I've forgotten what last week's show was even about.
you've forgotten what yesterday was about. Well,
Shall I go on?
anyway, that's an interesting question, right? So, what is the conscience? What is the source of a feeling of right? Because you look at one of the appealing features of toddlers is yes, they have the no and temper tantrums and all that aspect of the developing personality being the separate identity, but at the same time, children are very fair and want to help. And show caring and love and concern when they see somebody else hurting. I mean, that's very more common than not, I would say.
Yes.
Is that children,
I
very
agree
young
with that.
children, have those feelings. And
So you have to learn to be mean. Is that what you're saying? I think it's true.
well, I think that we are taught that. I think most of us learn that it's. When we're vulnerable, when we're caring about somebody else, so we're vulnerable, and so it's that's when we're teased on the schoolyard, and so we've learned that being weak and vulnerable is something to hide, and it's better to be tough and cynical, and that's what's cool, and that's what gets us along better in life, is to hide our feelings of morality and conscience.
Join the
I'd
crowd,
say
be
that's
tough,
my
fight
experience.
back, hit back, yeah.
The things of beauty and truth were things to hide from your peers on the schoolyard.
Well, that's by the schoolyard. By the
Yeah.
time you're in the schoolyard.
Well,
Before that, I mean,
I don't
I think
remember
it's kind of
much
an
before
innate.
that.
It seems to me it's a sense of fair play,
Yeah.
fairness. It's not fair that you should just pick on me for no reason. Mm-hmm. We just watched To Kill a Mockingbird for the umpteenth time. And there's a perfect example of a subjective belief called racism. Mm-hmm. That everybody was influenced by it. It was like when Atticus was going to drive Cal home, and she didn't even think about it. She just got in the back seat. There was absolutely no question of sitting up front. And that was Atticus Fenn. She was the most
decent man in town, white man in town. Yeah.
Even though there was an interesting part of that book that it sticks in my mind that he had no problem with rape being a capital offense. Mm-hmm. always stuck out. It seemed like,
Yeah, but people are a creature of their time. Even if they're ahead of their time, they're still going to be affected by their time. So, you can't expect saints. I mean, we can, but we'll be
but you're going to
disappointed.
be, waiting a long time. I wouldn't hold my breath. I'll put
Okay.
it that way.
Well, so I mean, we can debate about, when the conscience, is beaten out of us, or beaten into hiding. But I think your main question really
Or
was.
maybe it's not beaten. Maybe we make a pact with the devil.
Well, okay, right. I mean, we could talk about that, which is an interesting topic. But I think I don't want to leave what I think your first original question was, which is
I had a
where
powerful,
did the
organic sense of shame when I
Right.
did that,
So-
when I played a trick. And I knew the reason I was playing a trick on them was because they were poor and had
Right.
snotty noses.
right? So they were low on the pecking order, and it was acceptable to pick on them.
It still makes me feel really bad. If you're out there, I'm sorry. Couldn't help it.
Okay, so your question is why? Why did you feel that way? Why wasn't it just did you why was it why did it make you feel bad? I guess that's the question.
Well, that's what I looked at. I wrote, and to
Yeah.
you, the note I wrote to you, as you haven't seen yet, is what is the conscience? Is it the objective mind? I mean, clearly there was a subjective, a personal opinion that I'd already formed and no doubt had picked up from the schoolyard, from my peers, that these kids, because they were poor and had runny noses, it was open season on them. It was okay to ridicule them and make their lives harder than they even were because they were poor. Anybody relate to that? Anybody relate to, want to turn your eyes and you see somebody on the street who's homeless? Because we're so into celebrity worship, which is probably one of the reasons, and that kind of titillated us with the Bushian dynasty, why we elected someone who's completely incompetent to the presidency of the United States for 8 years, and tortured prisoners and started an unnecessary war. Shall I go on? And finally crashed and burned the world economy. And Crazy Palin, that woman is clinically insane. She's out of her freaking mind. And a complete mediocrity, a redneck in a word. Everything that's meant by redneck. I don't care how far north you are. That's not a southern generalization. She's a mediocrity. She's absolutely unfit for the presidency. She's probably got a good chance because we worship wealth and celebrity. The wealthy can do no wrong. We think Donald Trump is somebody to emulate, somebody to worship.
Okay, wait.
Okay, so we're getting off track. All right.
Yeah.
So, but the point is, I assumed, we talk in the book about what a belief is. A belief can't just exist in a vacuum. It requires a believer. It's a parasite that it works like a parasite-host relationship. Once I accepted that poor people are deserving of contempt, that's where it came from, that part of
right.
the book. Once I accepted that idea, naturally, it became as real as look both ways when you cross the streets, the way the mind stores stuff, especially when you're a child. Little pictures, soak it in. And so my actions were completely determined by that. I acted on it. Poor people are deserving of contempt, so that's okay. It's okay to drop, stones on the poor kids' heads as a trick on them just because they're poor. They deserve it. But it was in conflict with something, I would suggest, and that's where the shame came from. And the reason it really hit me was I don't think it came from my grandmother's moralizing. No doubt that had influence.
Right.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That was in there. But I don't think we need to learn that. It occurred to me that what I asked, the note to you was, what is the conscience?
Yeah.
Is it the objective mind, which says look both ways when you cross the street? The objective mind would also say it would never advise treating someone cruelty because of their income. I would say it would, but I don't.
But why? Why? I
why
mean,
would-
I don't understand. I mean, see, to me, this is a question you're coming to. It's not. It's why is it bad to treat someone else cruelly? It doesn't matter why. The reason, you can fabricate thousands of reasons for treating someone cruelly. But that's the main point is why